Because every reaction or every action that we make has some sort of effect on either the environment or the community.
Hi, Marco here from PARALENZ, and today I'm talking with Bradley Robertson from Save the Meds Foundation. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us.
Yeah, pleasure, Marco. Thanks for inviting me along.
You are one of the co-founders of the Save the Med Foundation, is that right? Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing, who you are, and more importantly also, what is the Save the Med Foundation doing?
Wow, how long do we have? My name's Brad Robertson. I'm Australian. I've been living in Mallorca for the last 10 years. And I started a marine conservation organisation about 8 years ago, and it has evolved into becoming Save the Med Foundation. We work on two areas. One area is marine protection, and the other one is pollution reduction. It's been quite a ride, to say the least. This is a grassroots organisation that started from nothing, except for some passion and determination. And with the combination of that passion, determination, and some exceptionally good people, we now call ourselves Save the Med Foundation. So it's a pretty cool story.
Awesome. And what exactly does Save the Med Foundation do? What is the core of your work?
So in the two different target areas, we work on education, outreach, policy change. So it varies. We started with plastic pollution. Many years ago. We actually merged with another organisation. So my old organisation and an organisation called Alnitac came together to form Save the Med, and that I think is really important. Aside from the details of the work that we do, that collaboration and the real core collaborative spirit of small to medium NGOs working for real conservation objectives is super important these days. So to be in an organisation that the foundations is collaboration is really quite cool.
And we're talking today mainly also because of the background that the UN has now officially called out the Decade of the Ocean starting from January 2021. And so over the next 10 years, I think the UN and all of the involved organizations and individuals that want to take part in this, they also need what you just described as like being the key recipe for your success, like passion, determination to get this Decade of the Ocean to be a successful one. We've previously talked to Oliver Steeds from the Nectar mission about what the work that they are doing in the Indian Ocean. And as far as I know, Save the Meds, you are mostly concerned about the Balearic Islands and the area there. Could you tell us a little bit about what is happening there when it comes to like ocean life?
Well, I mean, yeah, of course. With like I was saying, we evolved from just a seed idea and very much a local-based or local-focused organisation. However, what we do have and what we're designing at the moment is our Mediterranean strategy. Although our focus is on the Balearics, our outlook is on the Mediterranean as a whole. It's such a special place in regards to the marine environment. Obviously, being an Aussie, I've had quite a lot of experience in pristine seas, being the Coral Sea, doing a lot of diving up and down the east coast of Australia and seeing some really spectacular and having some amazing interactions with animals. To come to the Med and discover what I would call a marine paradise in amongst the very, very sick was quite a stroke of luck for me personally and professionally. The fact that every year that I'm here, I'm discovering more about this place. It says a lot, and I think what's really important, particularly for a body of water like the Med, is to have a showcase location that really inspires not just people here in the Balearics, but people all around the Mediterranean to know what this sea, the potential that this sea has to regenerate and to go back to what she was many years ago. And in fact, I don't even think there is a baseline for the Med in regards to what it was like before human interaction. And then you've got invasive species. So it's a very, very interesting body of water. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to contribute and add value to the regeneration of it. In regards to the 30% of all of our seas being protected by 2030, it's also extremely important that we remember and we look at the failures of the past. Now, when I and my partner in crime, Jaime, our manager, are talking about the development of Save the Med, and I'm sure this goes for most managers around the world, is that you're looking at what needs to be improved. So you're looking at the elements that haven't worked or that don't work. The elements that do work, fantastic, but they're working. Let's not focus on them. Let's continue with them. But let's really put our brain power, our collective brain power, to what's not working. From my limited experience here in the Med, there's a gaping hole in the communications between on-the-ground work and policymakers. If policymakers in the European Union are going to make effective policy and much more effective than what they've been doing, then there needs to be a closure of this hole. There needs to be communication processes and protocols in place where organisations like Save the Med, organisations like Maria's Foundation, another organisation focused on the Balearics, where we have the ability to take information back up to policymakers and allow them to make policy with all the information required. It seems like this is really where organisations like Save the Med and other small to medium NGOs around the Mediterranean can collectively contribute and add serious value to the marine management of what is possibly the most historical sea in the world.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense, of course. Especially like when you said that where the most change can happen is when the on-the-ground workers and the policymakers like really, get their hands together and don't work in silos, but actually exchange information, open up their databases and the learnings from the past. And as you mentioned, with not just focusing on like the work that is going good, but also like to see, okay, where did we have the failures in the past? Why was that like that? And then how can we move on from there? And how can we take the learnings from maybe within the same region, but also like maybe looking into other regions in the world and then coming to a conclusion and finding a new way or expanding on the way that has already been paved. So with the Balearics and also the Mediterranean seas, do you know by any chance like how many marine protected areas there are in that region?
All right, so and off the top of my head, no. So let me consult my notes. But according to MedPan assessment in 2016, there are 1,215 MPAs covering 171,362 kilometres squared, which is a surface of 6.8 under legal designation. I think it's pretty much common knowledge that most of those are paper parks. I think this goes back to what I was saying about this lack of communication between policymakers and what's happening on the ground. If you don't inspire and engage local stakeholders, protecting their body of water, which is in front of their location, it doesn't matter what piece of paper you make at European level, it's not going to work. So therefore, one of the really key areas of Save the Med's previous successes is exactly this. And this is, there's a small island off the southwest coast of Majorca called Sa Dragoneta. And this was a real inspirational story of collective involvement by various stakeholders at a local level to work with the local government, NGOs, and also the Spanish mainland government to establish a local MPA in local waters that was really, if you look back at the process of Sa Dragoneta becoming an MPA, it was a whole line of steps done from individuals to NGOs to businesses to make this happen. And that story, I think those sort of stories should be told in a lot more detail than what I've just done, because this is how things happen, and at European level, we've got this motivation and these titles of 2030, and it's fantastic to have these targets to work towards. But just let's remember where the delivery is made is at a local level. Now, if you don't have the fishermen involved, if you don't have the local governments involved, it's going to be very, very difficult to maintain any sort of real management of these marine protected areas. This is really the key point when we talk about identifying failures, is to have a good management plan in place to make sure that the stakeholders are involved, and also a monitoring program that allows the management bodies to really realise and understand whether their policies are working or not. And to have policies that are flexible enough that can change over time, because if the science isn't giving us the right answers and we need to change the management tools or the management design, we need to work within a framework that allows that. And again, potentially, this is another area where the European MPA systems have completely failed.
The spark doesn't only come from one source. Like different stakeholders, they need to, from the very beginning already, kind of work together or start working together. And then how does an MPA become successful that's how I understood it, that the conversations between the different stakeholders, the policy making, the exchange of data, the exchange of knowledge, that kind of really goes through the whole lifetime of an MPA. It needs to be kind of on the same value basis, so that no stakeholder is kind of excluded just because you're a fisherman. It doesn't mean that your input is not valid to science, to marine researchers, to policymakers, and so on. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, fishermen, from our point of view, are critically important for local MPAs in the Mediterranean Sea. It's they're custodians of the sea, and particularly when you're talking about responsible, artisanal, traditional fisheries, it's really chiselled into the culture here. And, to get people to be involved, a lot of people are, and this is one of the things that I really like about living here in Spain, is that the huge depth of culture that's here. And that needs to be definitely a part of this MPA design. An MPA needs to be a dynamic, living concept that these stakeholders are continuously becoming involved in. We all need to eat. And one of the frameworks that works here in Spain is the fishery MPAs. Most of the MPAs, if not all of them in Spain, are based on fisheries reserves. So they're mainly interested in what fish stocks can go to market. But there's obviously conservation benefits from that as well. Other legal frameworks can be added to that mix to make it a more complete design. But the custody of MPAs needs to be in the hands of the users.
If you go back a little bit about MPAs, from let's say, okay, this part of, within the Balearics or Mediterranean, we want that to be an MPA. From this point on, that you have the idea of this place could be a great MPA. We need to protect this area, to being implemented officially. How long does that take?
It's an interesting question because, if I look at Dragonetta, for example, and it was actually a group of scientists that I had the pleasure of working with, and I still have the pleasure of working with, that designed the proposal for the Dragonetta MPA, the Sar-Dragonetta MPA. Now, that was all done on their free time. So that was done voluntarily. That was done with no budget from us. So that whole process, just to get the design done and presented to the government and implemented, took around about 7 years. Now, that doesn't include all of the work that happened before that. Other NGOs speaking to the government, individuals going to speak to the government. We were one element of that whole process. So you could probably, at a guess, not knowing the timeline before my involvement, add another 3 or 4 years to that. But that was with no money. And we all know that if there's a decent budget and the right people controlling that budget, i.e. working in the right areas, that time frame can be reduced dramatically. And the other thing is that you don't necessarily need official protection to have what would be in reality a protected area of the sea. You need vested interest from local communities that understand the benefit of protecting this, and you can have protected areas there without official protection, but they are managed by the local people. So this is something I would ask policymakers is how do you include that type of protection in the spreadsheet when they're adding up the numbers of protected areas in the Mediterranean to get to their 30%? Are they going to include this type of, say, marine custody, which is something that we're working on at the moment? How do we put that into the equation?
So it's not in there yet. It's not in there like in the official documents, right? It's not measurable at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that question. But it would be, I would love to know whether the policymakers are thinking about this type of protection, whether they have a way to measure it. It's interesting. It's how long does it take? In a very short answer, Marco, too long.
Too long, yeah. That's the gist of it. It's too long. But do you see that there is a trend towards that the time frames for single MPAs that it's going down, or is it kind of like staying at the same?
My understanding is it increased a lot in the last 10 years here in Spain. But I mean, that's nothing necessarily to be proud of, considering the management's not there. You know, and I'm not talking about necessarily the Balearics, but other areas of Spain that have been implementing MPAs and their paper parks. You know, so it's something, and here as well, you know, there needs to be a redirection of resources, and that redirection needs to go public money towards marine protected areas, so the local governments had more resources to implement the management, and also from European level and top down, there needs to be a redirection of money to some of these smaller and medium-sized not-for-profits that are doing absolutely amazing work, but their hands are behind their back as far as pushing things on a timeline is concerned, simply because of lack of resources. And when you look at the resources that these small to medium groups need, it's absolutely microscopic on an individual scale compared to what's going on an international scale.
Why do you think it is like that? Is it like the lack of communication? Is it the lack of response from like the official bodies like the EU or UN or Spain?
Yeah, I mean, I've got my views on what happens at upper management, and that needs a big shake-up. That needs a very, very big shake-up. I think people within upper management are on very good salaries and are basically very comfortable. So why, as a human being, would you want to change anything? Human nature, look after yourself, and everything is good. That I can't touch at the moment. But what I have seen is through our own evolution is that these small to medium-sized groups don't have the management capacity to basically attract larger funding, whereas the larger groups do have this management capacity. So therefore, the larger funders are going, okay, so this organisation ticks all of these boxes, so therefore they'll get the money. Whereas the smaller groups don't get the opportunity to prove themselves because a lot of these smaller groups are not started by accountants or lawyers or business people. They're started by people like myself I'm a dive instructor. That's the highest qualification I have, you know. And the only reason that I'm able to work within an organisation that is now starting to tick all of those boxes is because of the support that I've had from business-minded people that have allowed us to get all of our management strategies in place and all the protocols and procedures in place, and it's still happening. So this is what I see, and you know, if we really want to see a change in the marine environment, then there needs to be investment in bringing these small to medium groups up to a level where the funders can safely and confidently put in a few million euros and know that their money is going to be managed well. It's a big, complicated situation, to be honest.
Yeah, it sounds like that. It sounds also that it can be quite frustrating at times, I guess, where you just like feel, okay, this specific example could have gone a whole different direction if there was just like more... Not necessarily like more budget, but like budget well allocated.
Yeah, definitely. And skills well allocated as well. You know, it's like I said, without the assistance of certain people to assist me along the way, there's no way we'd be where we are because I just don't have those skill sets. And this, I think, is what would be great if we're talking about opening up this communication chain between grassroots and policy making, not just about what's happening in the field, but what's going on within the NGO world and how they're managed and assisting these NGOs to get to a stage where they can focus on their work and not have to worry about all the administration, which is not what they're good at.
Do you have an example for a very successful MPA, not only like in the actual effect it had on that specific area from like a marine point of view, but also maybe now that we've talked so long about that, a successful story when it comes to like just the speed of getting that MPA going on, or maybe about the really great communication that was going on between different stakeholders? Do you have maybe like a local success story you would want to share?
Well, I mean, the local success story, time-wise, it's very difficult. Spain, things take a long time, punto. So when you get into this, it takes even longer. But success stories as far as regeneration are concerned, there's a very, very small MPA called El Toro, and it's microscopic, but it is one of the best dives that you will ever do anywhere. And that's a big call. I've fed sharks in Australia. I've dived with Matt. I've done some really, really cool stuff. And every time I go to El Toro, particularly at a certain time of year, it's mind-blowing. And I've dived with some really, really experienced divers. When I say experienced, I mean people that have dived in what you would call epic dive locations around the world. And when they come here, and when I was teaching, and I'd ask them, what are you expecting from a dive in Mallorca? And they say, nothing, there's nothing here. It's the Mediterranean, it's dead. And that to me that is exactly what I wanted to hear. And I'd say, well, listen, I'll ask you the same question this afternoon. I'd take them for 2 dives in El Toro, and we're coming back. I can't believe it. My God, the last really experienced person I took for a dive there was that when they got back to the surface, they said to me, that was the best dive I've ever done. And I was like, can you just say that again, please? Because people don't expect that in the Med. And if you base your protection on science, which is really important, you will end up with a good management plan and a good monitoring plan. You will end up with world-class diving locations. And as a diver, that's the selfish reason I'm doing all of this.
Do you think that, these kind of reactions, like, okay, I did not expect that, like that was the best dive of my life. Do you think like this is more needed to be said, but also like to be, shouted out into Instagram and Facebook and like all these social media, like to have these kind of like voices from, be it recreational divers, be it professional divers, be it just like, snorkeling somewhere, to get like really the public attention a little bit more towards those kind of success stories that you can see like, okay, this is an area that has been kind of rebuilt, or this is an area that is now protected, and like just have a look at this beauty that we can now kind of have going forward in our lives and so on. Do you think like this kind of like exclamation of like, wow, it's more needed? Definitely.
I mean, and particularly like at that moment, Marco, when people come to the surface, the hair's everywhere, mask coming off, big smile on their face, and capturing that moment, and then promoting these really special personal experiences. This is what we're human beings, we connect with other people. It's very difficult for somebody that doesn't dive or doesn't snorkel to understand why it's so important to protect the sea. But if you see somebody who's beaming with happiness, and the reason they're beaming with happiness is because of the experience they just had within a successful marine protected area, I think you've got a much better chance of connecting with people that don't put their face in the water.
Looking back into 2020, of course there was COVID. It was not not the best of years if you look at like all of global happenings and so on. But how would you review 2020 for Save the Med?
That's a really, really difficult thing for me to say, particularly publicly, because I know how painful 2020 was for many, many people around the world. a lot of my close friends, a lot of my family, really, really struggling. But Save the Med itself had its best year ever in 2020.
Congratulations on that.
Amazing. I mean, when 2020 started, we predicted a good year. Then March came, COVID came, and obviously it shook us up a little bit, kept all of our employees. Our projects grew, our funding grew. You just have to have a look at our 2020 summer highlights video and you'll understand exactly why I'm saying it was our best year. Yeah, it's a very cool video. Thanks to Dan, Sharkman Dan, for putting that together for us. But, as for moving forward, 2020 we also hired Jaime, a new manager, and this goes back to what I was saying about small to medium NGOs not having that business skill set within their organisation due to lack of funding. We've managed to get somebody on board who does have those skill sets.
What are your plans as a foundation for this year, for 2021?
2021 is we're still looking into the unknown in regards to COVID. But I think, to be an organisation that can put out, because multimedia is a big, big strength of ours, and this is one of the important things about this relationship with PARALENZ. For organisations like Save the Med and PARALENZ to work together to be able to share some positive news about the Cs, the successes, the students that we have on board whose lives change when they spend a week on board our boat and have these interactions with the marine life, and to be able to put this out publicly and give some sort of positive light on a really, really negative situation being COVID. I think this is not just part of our responsibility in regards to conservation or regeneration, but our responsibility in regards to our contribution to our communities. It's really important that we spread the good news.
Awesome. Do you have any last comments or suggestions to the people that are watching now or listening to our chat? How can people contribute both to Save the Med Foundation and also to healthier oceans wherever they might are? Do you have some tips for people out there?
This is always a good question, and I wish I had a spot-on response that gave everybody the book of how to be a good human being, But everybody lives in a different location and different environment, and I think the best thing that we can all do is just think about our actions. And if you don't understand something about your own actions and how they potentially affect not only the environment but the local community in a negative way, then do some research on what you're doing and see whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Because every reaction or every action that we make has some sort of effect on either the environment or the community. And if we're focused on trying to do positive things and we understand what we're doing, we can actually, through our actions, contribute to improving the community or improving the environment. Whether that's the sea or the land, it doesn't really matter. The sea would be perfectly fine if we just left it alone, right? The problems are not in the sea. The problems are here within us. So we need to really reflect on how we do things, and what we're doing is my best advice.
Thanks so much, Bradley. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Happy days, Marco. Really nice to talk to you, man.